Welcome back to Weems Motor Co. Let's get some foot pegs on the Born Free build. Stick around. Alright, so last video you've seen us getting this bike into mock-up, and today we need to get some foot pegs on there. Now, piece of advice. Usually I come into these videos with some sort of plan or idea, and today, let's just say, we're shooting from the hip. What the plan is to take some Harley-Davidson style mounts, weld them onto the frame, and then custom build the shafts coming off of there so that we can use some really sweet stainless steel foot pegs that I had made just specifically for this build. Now, they're not finished out, they're not sanded, smooth, and polished, they're just bent up, made to my specifications, something cool and different to be using on this Born Free build that we have titled Ultor, which in Latin means the Punisher, because we built the judge, we built the jury, and now we are building the Punisher. So, super stoked about it. First thing we need to do is to get stock foot pegs on there to just kind of get an idea of where our pegs need to be, and then make some measurements and then weld the tabs on. So let's grab those stock foot pegs. Alright, now that we have the time inside stock foot peg on here, we kind of know where we need to have our feet when it comes to having shifters on there, and also clearance for exhaust and things like that. But the idea is to take these cast steel Harley-Davidson foot peg mounts and actually weld them to the frame, and then we could take some solid stock. This is actually 3/4, but we're gonna have to turn it down, make it look cool and everything, and tap a hole in the bottom that would mount into that Harley-Davidson, and then we would have to bend and maneuver this rod so that when we get out to the end with these stainless steel foot pegs, it ends up being pretty close in the same area that the stock ones would be. So you might be saying, Weems, why all the work? Why don't you just use the stock foot pegs? Because that's what everyone else would do, especially when it comes to building Triumphs. Not a whole lot of guys venture out and do a lot of things differently, so we thought we don't want to get too far outside of the box because that could not be a good thing. So I want to be just inside the box, you know, just right on the outer side of the limits of it. So we're going to make some custom foot pegs for this thing, but keeping with where the stock riding position would be, because Triumph did it right first time. So how are we going to figure out this point in space? I decided just to take a couple pieces of 2x4, placed it on either side of that foot peg, and then I could take some masking tape and mark where that is on the ground, and so we know that when that new foot peg comes in there, it needs to be generally in that area. So we know where we're going to be at. We're going to take this off, and then we'll see if we can get this tab welded into place, and then we can start taking that piece of rod, bring it over to the lathe, and make it cool so that it will work for this application. So let's get to work. Now that we got that tack welded into place so we know where that bottom mount is going to be, we need to figure out how we're going to bend this so that we know how long we need to cut it. Like I said, we have this piece of 3/4 inch solid steel rod. We're going to turn it down to, I don't know, 5/8, something like that, to make it work with these foot pegs. So the way to figure out how long we need to have that piece of metal is we're going to take a piece of welding rod. This is just steel filler rod for TIG, and I'm going to hold it generally in the area that we need to be at down there, and kind of bend it, manipulate it up to where that point was we used with the 2x4s. And we'll know after this is all bent, we can measure it and see how long we need to cut this, and then we can get over to the lathe and drill that hole, tap it, and make it look cool before we bend it into place. So let's take the welding rod, move it around, see what we got to do. Alright, so here is our basic shape. Now, we're going to be cutting it off about right there. Did some measurements, it looks like it's going to be right at about 10 inches, so we're going to leave us a little bit of wiggle room, so we'll go ahead and cut a piece at 11 inches. And then we can go ahead, and that end that mounts down there, we can go ahead and drill, tap, and I got a cool little idea for the stylistic part of that mount. So let's cut up this 3/4 and let's get it over to the lathe. Because we knew that we had about 2 inches at the bottom where it mounts into that mount, we wanted to drill that hole in to give it the most strength as possible. So we went in 1.5 inches, and we have some 1 3/4 bolts that we can thread into the bottom of that. Now, 1.5 inch hole with 1 3/4. Why is that different, Weems? Well, because the thickness of the mounting tab. So basically, this is the part that's welded onto the frame. We run the bolt up through the bottom of that, and then we screw this all the way down so it has all of that internal force, being able to have the strength that we need when it comes to using foot pegs. Now, so as I screw this down, la 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 la, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. All right, there we go. So as that's screwed down, this is the part that sits on the frame, and this comes up. Now we put that ribbed pattern in there because we have that rib pattern on the front brake, the rear brake, and also the wheel spacer, so we're kind of carrying that theme into our foot pegs rather than it just being some smooth rod that's bent around. I mean, it'll work, but we want to make sure it looks cool too. So we know that that's going to be there. Now the next portion is getting it to match this bend. So what we're going to do is get it over to the frame, and we're going to mount this into where the frame is, and then we can begin to heat that up and bend it and manipulate it. But before we do that, I'm going to turn down the outside diameter of this, because right now this is 3/4 inch, and at the end where those foot pegs are is 5/8. So we're going to go ahead, turn down the diameter of this down to 5/8 of an inch, and then it'll be a little bit thinner, make it a little bit easier when we go to heat it and bend it. So let's get it back in the lathe and then turn this down, and then we can get it to the frame, and then we can heat it, and then we can bend it. So yeah, let's do it. Now that we got that rod all mounted onto the frame, we can use our template for our bends to mark where we want our bends to happen at, so we can heat those areas and use a piece of tubing to use leverage and pull them down. So let's mark it for the first bend. That should clear our gearbox, then we can get our gearbox housing back on there, and then continue doing those bends up and make it happen. So let's heat it up. All right, we got one bend done. That gets us out away from that gearbox. Now we can continue that second bend, which brings it up and then levels out. So this time we're just gonna record both bends. While that other side cools down, I figured go ahead, move over to our primary side to be able to start getting all of that stuff bent and welded and all of those things. But there are a few elements on this side of the bike that are really important The other side we had to deal with the shifter over there. Over here we have to deal with the primary cover clearance, we have to deal with the brake pedal, and also the kickstand. Speaking of kickstand, I have had this kickstand kicking around for a long time, and this is a 1950s aftermarket part for when these motorcycles only came with the rear stand, which would go off the axle and lift up and sit in the middle. They didn't have side stands on the early ones. So this was made by a company called WEW. Not a whole lot of information out there on this company. There are some Indonesian repops that are coming out. I don't recommend getting any of that stuff. Their cast steel is not very good, very porous, and it would break. But this is an original OG, I'm thinking late 40s, early 1950s piece that we're gonna put on to service with this motorcycle. So gotta make sure we got clearance on all of these things for a foot peg. Last thing we wanna do is get everything welded in place and realize that the kickstand won't fold up, and that wouldn't be good. So let's go ahead and get a primary cover on there. That'll get us to where we can put on our foot peg to know where that alignment is going to need to be when we go to bend all the things. And then we can put a brake arm on there just to make sure it lines up with that foot peg. And then we can get busy on getting this thing heated up and bent in place. So let's bolt these things on. Now with all of those crucial items in place, we can take our 2x4s, just like we did on the other side, line them up, and put our tape marks down to figure out exactly where that needs to be in correlation to the frame, and so that the brakes will work and the kickstand and all of that. One thing that we want to make sure is that we do go around to the back side of the motor to make sure that they are level, because these foot pegs are adjustable. You can go up and down as they swivel on that center bolt. So we might make sure that from the back they are the same height, and then we can also make sure that they're not wonky in any sort of way. Then we can look down over the top of the motorcycle to make sure that as far as front to back that they are also in line. So let's get the tape lines down, make sure everything is nice and tight and straight, and continue working on Ultor, our Born Free 16 build. Alright, just to save on time, went ahead and turned up that other foot peg over on the lathe, got it all nice and neat, ready to go. And we went ahead and threw that clutch basket on there because we are going to make sure that we are clearing the chain for the primary and the clutch and all of that stuff. So we are good to go. So next thing we do is figure out how we're going to bend it. But this one, I think we're just going to do it by hand. It's a little bit more organic, making sure that we're clearing that chain area. So I'm going to bolt that onto that bottom tab, that holder, and then just break out the torches, heat it up, and then bend it around in a way that looks cool and has all the clearance. So let's get to work. Bend one done, clearing that around, we'll make sure that we're good. Now we can go ahead and do bend two, which is gonna raise it up around the outside of that clutch basket. So let's heat it up. All right, still looking good for clearance. We have one last bend to do, and that's bringing that down level. Now what I did was I took our 2x4 over on the other side, made sure that we put a little mark right there at the top to let us know what height the other side is, because we know the bike is set up level right now. So I just basically need to set that down right next to that board, put a mark, and heat on that point and bend it down so that it sits nice and level. So last bend, let's knock it out. And there you have it, folks, a set of custom-made foot pegs for Ultor, our Born Free 16 build. Super stoked. It's coming together. Got to trim up some ends, get the holes drilled and tapped for the proper mount so that they actually work as they're supposed to. But you get the idea, you get the gist of what's going on here, and we are super stoked to be able to continue on this process. Now, in our next video, we're going to be tackling mounting that rear fender, which means we're going to be making some struts and things like that. So you want to make sure that you have the notifications turned on our channel and you are following the playlist for this specific motorcycle build. But with that, if you are new around here, jump down and hit that subscribe button. If you really like the video, hit that thumbs up, turn those notifications on, and let everyone know what's going on right here at Weems Motor Co. Peace.